It was supposed to be just business, until he pulled her close and whispered what he wanted. It was supposed to be just business. That was the sentence Mara Ellison repeated in her head as the elevator climbed toward the top floor, the numbers glowing one by one like a countdown she hadn't agreed to start. Just business. A contract. A paycheck. Nothing about the man waiting upstairs. The elevator doors opened soundlessly. The office was glass and steel and quiet confidence, no personal photos, no clutter, no warmth, the kind of place that told you immediately who held the power, and at the center of it stood Rowan Hale. He didn't look up right away, that alone told her everything. Ms. Ellison, he said finally, voice calm, low, precise, you're late. She checked her watch out of habit. I'm early. That made him look at her, really look. The pause stretched half a second too long, not long enough to be rude but long enough to feel intentional, evaluating, measuring. Sit, he said, not unkindly, not gently, just certain. Mara sat spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She de-learned long ago that confidence didn't always look loud, sometimes it looked like stillness. Rowan Hale moved behind his desk and slid a thin folder toward her. Inside was the proposal and the problem. This acquisition falls apart in 3 weeks, he said. The press smells blood, my partners are restless, and the current narrative paints me as reckless. Mara flipped through the pages, already seeing the gaps, the vulnerabilities, the angles he hadn't addressed. You want a fixer, she said. I want a strategist, he corrected, one who understands perception as well as numbers. She glanced up. And you think that's me? I know it is. The certainty in his tone unsettled her more than doubt would have. I'm not cheap, she said. I'm not asking you to be. She closed the folder. I also don't work well under intimidation. Something like amusement flickered briefly in his eyes. Good, he said. Neither do I. Silence settled, not awkward, not empty, charged. Mara exhaled slowly. Let us be clear, if I take this, it stays professional, no blurred lines, no personal expectations. Rowan's gaze sharpened. This is strictly business, he said. I don't mix anything else into my work. She nodded. Then we agree. He leaned back slightly. You'll be embedded, full access. Late nights, travel if necessary. I can handle pressure. I'm sure you can. The way he said it made her wonder if he meant more than the words aloud. She stood. Send the contract. I'll review it tonight. Rowan rose as well, not to loom but close enough that she noticed. The subtle shift in the air, the way his presence filled space without effort. Ms. Ellison, he said. She met his eyes. Once you step into this, he continued, voice quieter now, there is no half measure. I expect focus, discretion, loyalty to the work. Her jaw tightened. I don't belong to my clients. A pause. No, he agreed, you don't. Something passed between them then, acknowledgement maybe, respect, or warning. The first week was relentless. Mara moved into Rowan's world like a necessary intrusion. Strategy meetings, late-night calls, documents stamped confidential that could topple careers if mishandled. She worked from the glass-walled conference room outside his office, close enough to feel his presence without being invited inside. He tested her constantly, not with cruelty, but with pressure. Why would they leak this? What happens if we don't respond? Say it again without jargon. She didn't flinch. By Thursday night the building was nearly empty. Mara rubbed her eyes, staring at the screen, the numbers blurring together. She hadn't noticed Rowan approach until his shadow fell across the table. You should stop, he said. She looked up. We're not done. You are, he replied. Your output will suffer. I don't need managing. I'm not managing, he said calmly. I'm noticing. That annoyed her more than an order would have. I can decide when I'm finished. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. 5 more minutes. He turned to leave. Mr. Hale, she said before she could stop herself. He paused. You don't trust easily, she added. His head tilted slightly. Neither do you. That's why this works, she said, a beat. Yes, he replied, that's why. The moment everything shifted happened without permission. They were standing too close, reviewing a document on his tablet, their shoulders nearly touching. Mara leaned in to point out a line item, unaware of how near she'd moved until she felt it. Heat, not imagined. Real. Rowan inhaled slowly, deliberately. She felt the movement beside her, felt him restrain it. Step back, he said quietly. She did immediately, but the damage was done. For a fraction of a second his composure had slipped, not enough for anyone else to notice, enough for her. They didn't speak about it. They went back to work, but something had shifted. That night as Mara packed her bag, Rowan spoke again. This arrangement works because it stays contained, he said. She nodded. Agreed. His gaze lingered too long. Yes, he repeated, contained. She left the building with her pulse racing for reasons that had nothing to do with deadlines. It was supposed to be just business. But as the city lights blurred past her on the walk home, one thought refused to settle. If this was how it felt when he was holding back, what would happen when he finally stopped? Mara learned quickly that Rowan Hale didn't waste motion. Everything he did had purpose, every step, every word, every silence. He didn't fill space unless there was a reason, which made his presence impossible to ignore when he did. Especially now. By the second week, her role stopped being theoretical and became immersive. She wasn't just advising from the outside anymore, she was inside the machine. Early mornings, midnight calls, strategy sessions that stretched until the city outside the glass walls went dark and then bright again. She saw how his world worked, and how unforgiving it was. Rowan's office was no longer off-limits. He waved her in without ceremony now, voice clipped, focused. Close the door. Why? Because what we're about to discuss doesn't leave this room. She closed it. That became the pattern: privacy without intimacy, access without softness. They sat side by side at the long conference table, documents spread between them, shoulders close enough that she could sense his body heat, but not touching, never touching. You're underestimating the board's fear, Mara said one night, tapping a page. They don't want reassurance, they want dominance. Rowan leaned back slightly. Explain. They don't need proof you're stable, she continued. They need to believe you're untouchable. His gaze sharpened. And how do I do that? She met his eyes. By controlling the narrative before it controls you. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not amusement, approval. Good, he said, draft it. She worked until her fingers ached. Rowan didn't interrupt, he didn't hover, he simply stayed silent, watchful, present. The first crack came at a client dinner, not a formal event, not public. Just powerful people behind closed doors where reputations were dismantled quietly. Mara felt it immediately, the way eyes lingered too long, the subtle dismissals disguised as charm. And you are? One man asked, looking past her toward Rowan. Before she could answer, Rowan spoke. She's the reason you're still sitting at this table, he said calmly. The silence that followed was sharp. Mara glanced at him, startled. Rowan didn't look at her. She speaks for me, he added. You do well to listen. The man flushed and nodded. Later, as they walked back to the car, Mara broke the silence. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Rowan replied. I did. She stopped walking. Why? He turned to face her, fully, expression unreadable. Because you earned it. The words settled deeper than she expected. After that, things changed subtly, irreversibly. Rowan started asking her opinion first. Waiting, listening. He didn't interrupt when she spoke, didn't correct her in public, didn't allow anyone else to undermine her authority. And she noticed other things too, the way he always positioned himself slightly between her and crowds. The way his eyes tracked the room when someone stood too close. The way his voice dropped instinctively when he spoke only to her. It wasn't romantic, but it was intimate and dangerous. The late night that broke her restraint happened without warning. A deal fell through, a leak surfaced. The press began circling again. They were both exhausted. Mara sat on the edge of the conference table, rubbing her temples, heels discarded on the floor. This isn't working, she muttered. Rowan stood across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the edges of his control visibly fraying. It is, he said. You're just tired. So are you. I don't get tired. She laughed softly. Everyone does, you just refuse to admit it. Something dark flashed in his eyes. Careful, he said quietly. With what? She challenged. With assuming you understand me. She slid off the table and stepped closer, too close. Then explain yourself, she said. The air shifted. Rowan inhaled slowly, as if restraining something physical. You don't need to understand me, he replied. You need to do your job. Her jaw tightened. Don't talk to me like I'm replaceable. The words landed hard. I don't, he said sharply. Silence stretched. Then he exhaled, controlled but strained. This proximity, he said, it complicates things. Her pulse spiked. You're the one who put me here. Yes, he said, and I don't regret it. That was worse. The near crossing came 2 nights later. They were alone in his office, city lights flickering outside like a restless heartbeat. Mara leaned over his desk, pointing at a line on the screen. You need to counter this before morning, she said. Rowan stepped closer to see, too close. She felt it, the heat of him, the way his presence wrapped around her senses, her breath caught before she could stop it. Rowan noticed. Immediately, his hand lifted then stopped in midair, a fraction of space, a fraction of control. "Step back," he said again, voice lower this time. She didn't. Not because she was brave, because she was tired of pretending she didn't feel it too. "You're holding yourself back," she said softly, his jaw clenched. "This is not just business," she finished for him, the words sounded hollow now. He leaned in, not touching but close enough that his breath brushed her cheek. "For your sake," he said quietly, "I am." Her heart thundered. A knock on the door shattered the moment. They broke apart instantly, composure snapping back into place like armor. The door opened. Reality rushed in. That night, Mara lay awake replaying it all, the almost touch, the restraint, the tension that felt like it might burn through them both. This was no longer neutral ground, and she knew it, because when she closed her eyes she didn't picture his office. She pictured his voice, low, controlled, holding something back. And she knew with terrifying clarity if he ever stopped restraining himself it wouldn't just be business anymore, it would be a choice. And she wasn't sure she was ready to hear what he wanted. The crisis broke at 11:42 p.m. Mara knew the exact time because the moment her phone lit up, everything else in the world seemed to fall away. "Rowan," she said the instant he answered, already moving toward his office. "They leaked the draft." "I know," he replied. His voice was calm, but too calm. "I'm looking at it." By the time she reached him, the building was nearly empty. The lights on their floor were dimmed automatically, leaving only his office illuminated like a glass box suspended over the city. The leak wasn't just bad, it was surgical. Someone had released just enough information to make Rowan look reckless without exposing their own hand. The market would panic by morning, the board would fracture. This wasn't damage control, this was war. "They're forcing your hand," Mara said, pacing. "If you respond publicly, you validate the narrative. If you stay silent, you confirm it." Rowan stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight. "What do you suggest?" he asked. She stopped pacing and met his gaze. "You disappear." He turned slowly. "Explain." "Tonight," she continued. "You let them think they've won, no statements, no denials. Tomorrow morning you come back with leverage they didn't anticipate." His eyes sharpened. "Which is me," she said. Silence slammed into the room. "You don't put yourself forward," she clarified quickly. "You put me forward. I handle the narrative, I take the heat, you stay untouched." Rowan stared at her like she'd offered herself as a shield. "No," he said immediately. "Rowan," I said no. She stepped closer. "This is my job, this is you becoming collateral," he snapped. She bristled. "I'm not fragile, I know," he shot back. "That's what makes it unacceptable." The words hit harder than anger would have. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another alert, another article. The room seemed to close in around them. Mara felt it then, the pressure, the exhaustion, the weeks of restraint and proximity snapping at once. "We don't have time for your protectiveness," she said sharply. He turned on her, eyes dark. "This isn't protectiveness." "Then what is it?" He didn't answer, he moved. In 3 long strides, Rowan crossed the room and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that her back brushed the desk, close enough that escape would require intention. "Mara," he said, voice low, controlled, dangerous. "This was supposed to be business." Her pulse thundered. "Then why are you standing like that?" His jaw flexed. "Because I'm trying very hard not to do something reckless." Her breath caught. "What something?" The air felt thick, charged. Rowan lifted his hand not to touch her but to brace it against the desk beside her, boxing her in without actually trapping her. The power of that restraint was worse than contact. "You don't want to know," he said quietly. She swallowed. "I think I do." For a long moment he just looked at her, really looked at her, not as an asset, not as a strategist, as a woman he had been holding himself away from for weeks. The restraint finally snapped. He leaned in, not touching her mouth, not kissing her, but close enough that his lips brushed her ear. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. "I want you," he said. The words hit her like a physical blow, not shouted, not claimed, admitted. "I want you to stay," he continued, breath warm against her skin. "I want you in my world, in my space where I can protect you and yes, where I can have you." Her knees nearly gave out. "But I won't take you like this," he finished. "Not when power is involved, not when you could mistake it for obligation." He pulled back abruptly, stepping away like the distance itself was necessary for survival. Mara stared at him, heart racing, skin burning. "You can't say that," she whispered. "I just did." The room felt suddenly too quiet, too exposed. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "That was a mistake." "No," she said softly, "that was honesty." He didn't respond. She pushed herself upright, forcing her voice steady. "What you want doesn't scare me." He turned sharply. "It should." "Why?" "Because once I crossed that line," he said, voice tight, "I don't know how to pretend it didn't matter." The words sank deep. Mara realized then that the whisper hadn't been the dangerous part. The dangerous part was that he meant it. They worked through the night in silence after that. Efficient, controlled, professional, but everything had changed. Every glance carried memory. Every pause echoed with what he'd admitted. At dawn, the strategy went live, and it worked. The narrative shifted, the board stabilized. The market exhaled. Mara should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. She found Rowan standing alone in the office later that morning, jacket on, ready to leave. "I can't do this anymore," she said quietly. He turned. "Do what?" "Pretend that whisper didn't change things," she replied. "Pretend I didn't hear what you want." Silence stretched between them. "What are you saying?" he asked carefully. "I'm saying I won't stay in a position where desire hides behind authority," she said. "If this continues, it has to be honest, equal." His jaw tightened. "And if it can't be, then I walk away," she said. The words hurt, but they were steady. Rowan looked at her for a long time, long enough that she braced herself for dismissal. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "Then this arrangement ends," he said, her chest tightened. "But not because you failed," he added, "because I did." She nodded once. "I'll finish the week," she said, "transition everything cleanly." He nodded, professional, controlled, but when she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Mara," she looked back. "What I whispered," he said quietly, "was not a moment of weakness." She met his gaze. It was the truth. She walked out with her heart in pieces and her spine intact. And Rowan Hale stood alone in his glass office, realizing that for the first time in his life, control had cost him something he actually wanted. The morning after the whisper arrived without mercy. Mara woke to headlines, not screaming ones, those would have been easier, but thoughtful, measured speculation. The kind that suggested concern instead of panic. The kind that spread quietly and stayed longer. Rowan Hale's name sat at the center of it all. She stared at her phone, pulse steady despite the knot in her chest. The strategy they'd pushed overnight was working, just not cleanly. There was a price now, attention, pressure, and she was standing directly in it. By the time she reached the office, Rowan was already in motion. Meetings stacked, calls overlapping, control back in place like armor freshly polished, except when he saw her, his gaze paused just a fraction too long. "Conference room," he said. Now the door closed behind them with a soft click. "You shouldn't have come in," he said. "I work here," she replied evenly. "You're no longer insulated." She crossed her arms. "Neither are you." Silence pressed in. "I meant what I said last night," she continued, "about not hiding behind authority." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm ending this." Her chest tightened. "Ending what?" "This arrangement," he clarified. "Your role here." The words landed clean and sharp. "You're firing me." "I'm removing you from harm," he said. "That's not your decision." "It is," he replied. "I should have made it sooner." Anger flared, hot, controlled. "You don't get to want me and then erase me," she said, "not to make yourself feel noble." His jaw clenched. "This isn't about me?" "It always is," she shot back. "That's what control does. It convinces you that your fear is responsibility." For the first time since she'd known him, Rowan looked shaken. "You don't understand what this costs," he said. "I do," she replied. "Because I'm paying it too." By noon, her access was revoked. Clean, professional, final. Mara packed her things slowly, deliberately. No tears, no scenes, just the quiet weight of something unfinished pressing at her ribs. Rowan didn't come to see her off. That hurt more than she expected. She left the building with her head high and her spine straight, even as the city swallowed her whole. The days that followed were strange, too quiet. No late-night calls, no strategy sessions, no restrained glances across polished tables. Mara took freelance work, short contracts, safe distance. But Rowan was everywhere, in the news, in conversations she overheard, in the echo of his voice in her head, low, controlled, confessing what he wanted and refusing to take it. She told herself it was better this way, cleaner. Then the board moved. They didn't leak, they didn't threaten. They voted. Rowan Hale was stripped of operational control pending stability review. The irony was brutal. Mara read the article twice, heart pounding, not with vindication but dread. This was what he'd been holding together. This was what he'd risked to protect her from, without thinking she was already moving. She found him where she hadn't expected to, not in the office, not in a boardroom. At a quiet bar overlooking the river, jacket loosened, tie undone, staring into a glass he hadn't touched. He looked human, not broken, but close. "You shouldn't be here," he said when she approached. "I don't work for you," she replied. "Remember?" He didn't argue. She sat across from him. "They voted," she said. "I know, and you didn't fight it." "I did," he said, "just not publicly." She leaned forward. "Why did you let me go?" He looked at her, then really looked. "Because if I crossed that line," he said quietly, "I needed to know it was choice, not proximity." Her breath caught. "And now," she asked, "now I don't have the right to ask you for anything." She swallowed. "That's not true." He shook his head. "I pulled you into my gravity. I whispered what I wanted, knowing exactly how much power I had." "You stopped," she said. "That matters. It doesn't erase it." "No," she agreed, "but it tells me who you are when it counts." Silence stretched, then she reached across the table and took his hand, just once, just enough. "I don't want safety if it means silence," she said, "and I don't want control if it means distance." His fingers tightened around hers, not claiming, asking, "What do you want?" He asked. She held his gaze, steady and sure. "I want you," she said, "but only if you choose me without leverage." The city lights reflected in his eyes like something breaking open. He stood. "So do I," he said. And for the first time, there was no contract between them, no deal, no hierarchy, just two people stepping forward without armor, the hardest choice either of them had ever made, and the only one that mattered. The first thing Mara noticed was how quiet it felt without strategy humming between them. No deadlines, no leverage, no reason to stand 6 inches apart and pretend it meant nothing. Just Rowan, just her. They didn't rush back into anything that mattered. Rowan stepped away from the spotlight first, not as a concession but as a decision. He resigned from the role that had made him untouchable and walked away from the board that had demanded certainty instead of integrity. The news cycle spun wildly, analysts speculated, investors panicked. Rowan didn't comment. For the first time in his life, he let go of control without replacing it with something else. Mara watched it happen from a distance, not because she didn't care, but because she needed to know he wasn't doing it for her. He didn't call every day. He didn't ask her to wait, he didn't assume. And that told her more than any declaration could. When he finally did reach out, it wasn't dramatic, just a message: coffee, no agenda. "If you want." She smiled before she realized she was going to say yes. They met somewhere neutral, a quiet cafe with chipped mugs and no private rooms. No power dynamics, no history tied to glass walls and locked doors. Rowan arrived early. That alone told her everything. "You look different," she said as she sat. "So do you," he replied. They talked like strangers, learning the edges of each other again. About work, about the city, about the strange relief of silence after noise. Not once did he reach for her, not once did he crowd her space. "You don't have to be careful," she said eventually. "I do," he replied gently. "Until you tell me otherwise." The respect in that landed deeper than desire ever could. The choice came quietly, no grand speech, no whispered confession under pressure, just truth. "I meant what I said," Rowan told her one evening as they walked along the river, the city breathing softly around them. "I want you, but I want you without advantage." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "And if you never get back what you lost?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Then I'll build something else," he said. "Something honest." Her chest tightened. "That's not an answer you practiced," she said softly. "No," he admitted. "It's the first one I've ever trusted." She reached for him then, not because the moment demanded it, but because she chose it. When he pulled her close this time, it wasn't to claim. It was to meet her where she stood, and when he whispered what he wanted now, it wasn't hidden. "I want a life where I don't have to measure my distance from you," he said, "and I want you to walk away the second it stops being mutual." She smiled against his chest. "Good," she said, "because I won't stay otherwise." They didn't pretend it was perfect. They argued, they recalibrated, they learned what it meant to choose each other without safety nets. Rowan rebuilt not an empire but a firm grounded in transparency and shared authority. Mara joined him months later, not as a subordinate, not as a savior, but as a partner with her own name on the door. No whispers this time, no locked doors, no business masquerading as distance. The echo of the past came one final time, a late night, a shared space. That same quiet intensity. Rowan paused before stepping closer. "May I?" he asked. Mara laughed softly. "You're asking?" "Yes." She closed the distance herself. "This," she said, resting her forehead against his, "is what makes it real." He pulled her close not because he needed to, but because she wanted him to, and when he whispered now, it wasn't what he wanted. It was what they had, something chosen, something steady, something that didn't need to hide behind contracts or control. It had started as just business. It ended as something far more dangerous. A love built on choice, and neither of them would ever settle for less again.